I don't know if you've noticed it or not lately, but there's been quite an escalation in the so-called war on terror in Afghanistan. We keep sending more and more troops. Well, Robert Greenwald of the Brave New Foundation, who used to be Brave New Films, has come up with a film called Rethinking Afghanistan. It's been shown in Brunswick at the Frontier Cafe, the Railroad Square Cinema in Waterville, and it was also shown in Belfast at the Colonial Theatre. It will be shown again also in Bangor at the Peace and Justice Center on September 20th. The film that I attended was at the Railroad Square Cinema. Immediately after the showing of the film, Jake Dilliberto, a Marine and combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan, was there on a panel, along with Nathan Havey. He's one of those who worked on this film, and also Rosemary Winslow from Congressman Michaud's office in Waterville. You can watch this film online for free, the entire film, all 6 segments of it. Part 1 focuses on what military escalation will achieve in Afghanistan. Part 2 looks at how the war could further destabilize a nuclear-armed Pakistan. Part 3 focuses on the staggering costs of the war, which could easily exceed $1 trillion. Part 4 examines the civilian casualties caused by recent U.S. airstrikes in Afghanistan. Part 5 questions the assumption that war can liberate Afghan women. And Part 6, this is the newest segment which is out, brings you 3 former high-ranking CIA agents explaining why there is no victory to be won in Afghanistan. Marine veteran Jake Dilliberto will later describe an event in Afghanistan that opened his mind to what the so-called war on terror is really all about.
And one of the things that we just want to emphasize is that we don't know for sure. And we're not here to say we've got it figured out, we're not. So we really want to have a discussion tonight about everything that's happening and about what you think. And for those of you that are involved in the peace movement, as Jake and I are, we're interested in sort of talking about how we can build our movement and be successful in ending not just this war, but ending America's propensity for war as well.
It's important for us to not consider ourselves in this room as left or right, as Republican or Democrat. It's important to us to consider ourselves thinking human beings who are capable of dialoguing this situation coherently and not let ourselves get out of control or get out of hand. It's important for us to be honest about this. There's a great scene in the movie Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey. It's a comedy. Jim Carrey's a comedian, a modern guy, and in this movie, he's in a scene and he's all flustered dealing with a girl because he's crazy about her. And he says to her, "What are the chances of a girl like me and a guy like you getting together? Just, what are the chances?" And so instantly, like, this is awkward. But she says, "Well, not good." And he goes, his heart sinks, and he says, "Like how not good? Like 1 out of 100? And she says, "More like 1 out of 1,000,000. He thinks for a second, and then he says, "So you're telling me there's a chance?" We've got to make sure in this conversation that we don't allow ourselves to get wrapped into a Jim Carrey story telling ourselves a fantasy that's simply not true. We've got to be coherent and clear about the history of the United States leading up to Afghanistan, and we've got to be clear about the history moving us forward. How did 9/11 happen? How did we get here? How did Afghanistan develop? What does it mean for our soldiers? What does it mean for us? And what does it mean for national security? And what does it most of all mean for us sitting in here? How can we think about this? At the end of World War II in 1945, if there was things to be built and there was things to be bought in, the United States was producing it. We were the world's leading producer. We were the leading innovator of technology and those sorts in the world. We were where people came to learn how to do things. And throughout the development of the United States up until the 1970s, every year we were living in the black, where we were not out consuming ourselves, we weren't expanding ourselves beyond unbelief, and we were looking at a country out of a post-World War II generation that really understood the cost of war. You see so many people in this room right now that come from that generation, that understand the errors and the causes and the sheer problems that that happens in war. As a Marine, I witnessed firsthand experiences of the problems of war. The sheer brutality, the problems that happens to somebody when they go into this. In the Odyssey, in the Iliad, there's something very clear that the author writes about. There's a very addictive nature to war that can consume people that don't have a conscientious moral aspect to them. Agamemnon's talking with Achilles, and he says to Achilles, "You see, Achilles, you have a problem. It's that you find war invigorating, and you are addicted to it. It makes you happy to slay people." Centuries ago, people knew the problems of war. We've got to make sure we don't get into a fantasy and tell ourselves that somehow war is good today and what war was bad then, or vice versa. As a Christian, I'm a just war theorist. I believe that all war is something that is problematic. But in some dire, very bad scenarios, it may be an egregious, necessary act. But at the same time, we've got to consider those elements of just war, of foreign policy, of balance, of addiction, and things of that sort, and apply it across the board. In the post-1970s, when the end of the fallout of the Soviet Union, and we learned our lesson in Vietnam, led us into the 1980s, and the fall of the Soviet Union happened. And we found ourselves, via the media and via historians, telling us that we were the world's superpower, the sole leader of the free world. And we found ourselves in a fantasy that somehow that our military was beyond rejection, and that we could go anywhere in the world and do whatever we wanted. And we found ourselves involved in Iraq, Part 1, Somalia, Kosovo, and every other military aspect after that. And then when 9/11 happened, that mantra of our world superpower nature came crumbling. And we were dealt with a new reality that somehow the invincible United States was vulnerable to 12 extremist religious fanatics that crashed planes into Twin Towers. This is the reality we lived with. And the United States then went into Afghanistan on 9/11, which I was a part of, to find the Taliban, to find Al-Qaeda, to root them out, and then to continue on with hopefully some sort of secure way of living. So 9/11, this egregious act of 9/11 didn't happen. And we found ourselves singing songs like The Angry American, and we found ourselves singing songs of the Taliban song. And there was a revival of American patriotism. And yet, at the same time, nobody was talking throughout that time about, do you remember about the cause and effects of war? Do you remember about this addictive nature that can consume us? Do you know about the problems that will happen if we find ourselves in an endless war? A war without limits, a long war. Things that are more costly than we have the resources to bear. And now we find ourselves in a dilemma 8 years later, coming up on the eve of the birthday of 9/11, that we are in the same place 8 years later with no real tangible solutions. And war has become profitable to the point where there's 3-to-1 ratio of civilian contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the media has not said anything about it. Nobody's raising the issues of American sovereignty. Nobody's raising the issues of justice and foreign policy. And to this day, we still find ourselves in a non-answerable, unended question. So my question for you, are you really willing to send one more soldier forth? Are you really willing to send your grandkids and your grandkids' grandkids and your grandkids' grandkids to go to another endless war that there is no long-term solution, of which we clearly can't afford, of which there is no tangible military solution, so we know, and also meanwhile know that there is 3-to-1 ratio of civilian contractors that are making 3 times the amount that the military service members are going under? Is that something that you want to continue? And wherever you're at, on your left issue or the right issue, whether you're a pacifist or whether you think that war is acceptable, are you willing to consider the morality issues, the ethical boundaries of just war, and apply them to the situations we're in? Perhaps that's something we should talk about tonight. And finally, I have a story I want to share with you about my conversion, about where things shifted for me. I was in Iraq, and I was in a Humvee. And we were going on the convoys, and we were securing regions that we were supposed to be. And one of our orders was given was that we would not slow down for anybody that got in the middle of the road. People should be smart enough. They should know that if we're coming through, they can't be in the road. Doesn't matter how tall the person is, doesn't matter what's going on. Because if somebody gets in the road and they block you off, you cannot slow down, because that's a risk to the movement of troops, it's a risk to the equipment. And on our second week inside of Iraq, there was a small child. I don't know if it was a boy or a girl. I couldn't see because I was in the back seat. But that child made its way playing in the streets as the convoy's coming through, because you have to know there's not a lot of vehicles in the rural cities of Iraq. It was playing, and the child was playing. It lost its ball. It went out in the street, and the lead vehicle speeded on its way on a 70-mile-an-hour speed, 60, 70-mile-an-hour speed. And it ran over the child, and the continuing convoy went over. This moment of situation where I was watching, I said, here's an innocent kid going through a secure town, which we knew we had secure, and we're left with a carcass, a dead human being, someone that was created in my Christian tradition in the Imago Dei, the image of God, and they deserve a certain dignity. This was a moment of waking I had that I said, aha, something's amiss, something's not right. And when I went on my way to my undergrad experience, one of my professors asked me to lead a group of students to Palestine. And I spent the summer with conservative, fundamentalist Muslims, that they prayed every day and they ate every day. And I worked teaching their kids English. And I worked with Jewish people and Muslims people and Christians, all alike. And we found at the end of the summer that we found our humanity. We found ourselves dignified because we came together and we wept and we cried over the tragedies that mankind has created. This war that's going on, whether it's a war of choice or a war of necessity, I don't care how you break it up, it's still creating a whole lot of crap. And I ask you tonight to consider all the crap you've seen on this, all the nonsense that's taking place, and ask yourself about this little child. Is it worth it? Would you want that happening to your kid? Do you want that to happen to your kid's kid? And better yet, do you want your grandkids to go through that same experience, that same dream that I have every night? I think that if we want to deal with this issue, we've got to stop getting ourselves, again, in this Jim Carrey fantasy and thinking that, oh, heroicism is something that Rambo did, and the romanticism of helping somebody on the street, as you said. That isn't the thing that we do in war. That isn't the thing. And we've got to make the stories of soldiers that when they come back and they tell their war stories, we make them real. We need to let that weigh on us so that we have the moral dilemma of saying, before we send our people to troops, I support the troops. I was a troop. I had an honorable discharge. I love the military. But before we send them off, I'm going to weigh. I'm going to let that sink on my heart before I say, yeah, we'll go send them. We've got to kill those bad guys. This is irrational. We've got to study history, folks, and beware that this is a problem.
Think about the fire in the sky. Just squeeze my hand tight as you can. We'll be ready when the thunder roars.